Welcome to Raising the NASBAR. I'm Jeff Lasky, the CEO of this great organization, the North Shore-Barrington Association of Realtors. I hope you're staying safe and healthy. I've been messing around in this industry for many years and have been fortunate to make the acquaintance of a ton of people, some who are very accomplished. Rarely am I intimidated as I was when I first met our guest last year on Raising the NASBAR. She's really smart, and I felt so fortunate she could carve out a few minutes of time to speak with us then about Fair Haven, NAR's fair housing simulation, and other fair housing big picture issues. I have to say I'm on some kind of lucky streak as Alexia Smokler has agreed to visit with us again this year to give us some fair housing updates and tell us how things have been going with Fair Haven. Alexia Smokler is the NAR Director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs. She represents NAR's positions on fair housing to Congress and federal agencies and manages NAR's ACT initiative, which emphasizes accountability, culture change, and training to advance fair housing in the industry. Before joining NAR, Alexia worked in fair housing enforcement at HUD on the staff of Congressman John Conyers, Jr., and with nonprofit civil rights organizations. Good timing on having you back today. As you all know, April is Fair Housing Month. Here at NASBAR, we have once again ramped up our efforts to help with education and awareness about fair housing, diversity, and inclusivity issues. Before we get started, though, I do want to congratulate you because you are now Alexia Smokler, NAR Director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs. Congratulations on the promotion.
Thanks, Jeff. And it's great to be back with you again today. And it was so wonderful to meet you in person at the Association Executives Institute in Atlanta last month. And I hope we can do that again really soon.
Yeah, please remind us all what Fair Haven is and how it came about.
So Fair Haven is our new online fair housing simulation training that we launched at the end of 2020. It's really a new approach to fair housing training. There isn't anything else like it. We decided to create Fair Haven not long after the release of the Newsday investigation of alleged real estate discrimination on Long Island in New York in 2019. Your members may be familiar with this investigation, a 3-year testing study conducted by a newspaper on Long Island to look at how the top brokerages were treating testers posing as clients of different backgrounds. What they caught on hidden camera was that real estate agents treated the white tester and the tester of color differently 40% of the time, almost half the time for Black testers. Agents showed them fewer listings. They steered them to different neighborhoods based on their race or national origin. They required some to be pre-approved to see listings and not others based on their race. They told them different things about crime and schools. I would encourage your members, if they haven't watched the documentary yet, to check it out. It's really a case study in what not to do if you want to stay on the right side of fair housing law. So we saw a couple of problems specifically with fair housing training in some of those hidden camera videos. First of all, we saw a real estate instructor giving a fair housing class for continuing education credit, where he was basically teaching, here's how to discriminate and not get caught. And then in the videos of the agents, we saw in more than one of these, the agent referencing their fair housing training. They said, I'm not supposed to steer. They named it. And then they did it anyway. Something wasn't connecting. So we decided that we needed a new kind of fair housing training, one that teaches not only the substance of the law, but also that would really resonate with realtors. So this training isn't your traditional lecture and quiz. There's no list of laws and provisions to memorize. We wanted to give members a chance to practice applying fair housing principles in scenarios that feel real. And so we based all the scenarios in this simulation on real fair housing cases and on conversations with members about their most frequently asked fair housing questions. So learners in the fictional town of Fairhaven take the role of an agent, and their goal is to sell 4 homes in 6 months. As they work against the clock to close deals, they encounter different kinds of discrimination. They'll reach decision points as they interact with clients and colleagues, and those decisions affect the outcome. So there are many different paths you can take through Fairhaven. Now, sometimes in Fairhaven, we flip the script. The learner now finds herself in the shoes of a client on the receiving end of discrimination. Each client point of view scenario is followed by video testimonials of real people who have experienced housing discrimination. With these powerful stories, Fairhaven aims to affect learners' emotions, to open them up to see and maybe even feel just a little the harm that discrimination causes in real people's lives. So we've set the bar high with this training, Jeff. It's our goal for learners to come out of this experience not only having a better understanding of fair housing law, but also seeing the world a little bit differently.
I'm going to tell you, I've not, and I've, like I say, been in this industry a long time. I don't know that I've seen a better way to learn about something than the work that's been done with Fairhaven. I just think it's, and by the way, when I say I think it's terrific, it's also, I know this is going to sound strange to say with the subject matter, it's fun. I really enjoyed the experience of going through it, enjoyed the learning that took place. I don't want to say it was accidental, but I mean, in a sense, you're going through this and learning, and then at the end of it, I'm like, oh wow, I know more than I did when I started this. So congratulations on just a great vehicle. Now, do you guys have any metrics regarding how many people have gone through and done Fairhaven, and what other feedback are you getting on it?
So since launch, about 37,000 members have accessed this training. That sounds like a lot, but we have 1.5 million members. So we're encouraging brokers and associations to promote or acquire this training. It's free. It takes about an hour to 90 minutes to complete. You can do it at your computer. You can even pause and save your progress and come back to it later. But you know, beyond the fact that this training is free and doesn't take much of your time, members are telling us that the time spent was really worthwhile. When we ask learners to rate their experience in terms of how it relates to their business, how impactful it is, Fairhaven consistently gets the highest marks. Learners have told us they got angry or tearful when experiencing the client's point of view. They've told us that Fairhaven opened their eyes, given them new tools, and given them more motivation to stand up for clients in situations where something doesn't feel right. So I hope that after folks watch this interview, they're going to go to fairhaven.realtor, log in, and invest an hour or two in this powerful experience.
Absolutely. And we're throughout the month of April, as well as throughout the rest of the year, but especially with a focus in April, telling our members to get out there and take advantage of this marvelous experience. I mean, and when I say that, marvelous meaning impactful, meaning a real effective learning experience. So thanks again for having marshaled the effort on this. You know, many of us have watched the Implicit Bias video. That's from, I think, 2020. Can you remind our audience what that is? And is there any way to go deeper on this subject?
I'd be happy to. So implicit bias is the way that our brains automatically and often without our conscious awareness associate stereotypes with people that we're not familiar with. We all do it. It's the way our human brains work. It's a shortcut. It helps us categorize things quickly and make sense of all the information coming at us all the time. but it can be a problem because a lot of those shortcuts are based on stereotypes about other groups that we get from media and culture. They aren't true. And so even as our conscious minds hold fairness and equal treatment as cherished values, our unconscious minds may be causing us to treat people differently or unfairly without our even intending to. And that can lead you down the road to a fair housing violation. If you're making assumptions about people based on their identity, taking shortcuts, that could lead you into steering. That could lead you into denying equal professional service. So we all need to be very careful that we aren't letting those mental shortcuts make bad decisions for us. So as you mentioned, back in 2020, we released that 50-minute training video, which is still up on nar.realtor for free. Following up on that video this month, we're rolling out a 3-hour classroom course on implicit bias that will qualify for CE credit. It's going to help members take a hard look at their own ideas about other groups and to learn tools and tactics about how to interrupt bias, interrupt stereotypical thinking, and get more comfortable working with people across lines of identity difference. This training is going to be offered through our Center for Realtor Development. And Jeff, the North Shore-Barrington Association of Realtors is a licensed provider of this content. So you have the opportunity to bring this course to your members. And I'm going to be watching.
Excellent. Well, and I'll be the first to be watching. But I'd say watching again, right? What I love about talking to you about this stuff is you have such a passion for it. This is something that is genuine. It's not just your job. You're doing it because you love doing this kind of work. So, and this was something that occurred to me in preparing for this is I'm curious as to why fair housing, not just because you're a great person, by the way, right? So let's take that part out of the answer and say, why is fair housing and its related issues so important to you?
Well, Jeff, it's how I was raised. My grandfather, Ned Smokeler, was a member of what we think was the first racially integrated law firm in the United States in my hometown of Detroit in the 1920s and 30s. Papa Ned used to pose as a straw lessor to help Black lawyers get office space downtown when commercial buildings would not lease to them because of their race. Later on, Papa Ned became a home builder. I just learned this recently. And he built homes in Detroit that were mostly bought by returning Black GIs after World War II. Now, back then, because redlining and racially restrictive covenants were still in place, did you know that only a handful of the 1 million Black GIs that served in World War II were able to use their GI benefits to become homeowners? So I grew up with racial equity as a fundamental value that I learned from my family. I spent my first 10 years living in an integrated neighborhood in Detroit. Then I moved to the suburbs and went to a school that was almost all white. And the other kids were absolutely shocked that someone like me, someone white, had lived on the other side of 8 Mile Road. They had grown up hearing a story about Detroit from their parents, from the media, that did not square with my own experience living there. It had a really strong effect on me at that young age that we had lived in 2 different and completely disconnected worlds, and something about that wasn't right. So after college, I worked for a civil rights champion from Detroit, Congressman John Conyers Jr. In law school, I focused on civil rights, and after law school, I got recruited into HUD's Fair Housing Office by Brian Green, who's now NAR's Vice President of Policy Advocacy. Brian brought me with him when he came from HUD to the Realtors. So that's my journey from Detroit to NAR and why I'm so invested in these issues.
Yeah, well, and if you didn't just pick this up like a month ago or something like that. This is something you've been passionate about for your whole life. That's a great story. But now I want to get back to some practical aspects of this. And so I'm going to go first to asking you about the long-term impact that segregation, redlining, other discriminatory policies have had in our communities. Are there metrics or other ways of measuring behavior that are used to demonstrate this?
So I just mentioned that most of the 1 million Black GIs returning from World War II weren't able to use their GI benefits to buy homes because of discrimination. That time after World War II was when America transitioned from a land that was majority renters to majority homeowners. And that was because of federal programs designed to boost homeownership for those returning GIs. So the federal government financed the building of the suburbs, the interstate highway system to reach them, making cheap new homes available to the returning GIs, the returning white GIs. You see, those new developments all had racially restrictive covenants written into their deeds. It was required as a condition of the federal financing so that a Black veteran couldn't buy in that neighborhood. So my grandpa, now I'm talking about my other grandpa, Grandpa David, came back from liberating Paris with the US Army and bought a new house in a new subdivision, and he could pass that equity down through my family, and my family could help pay for me to go to college. Somebody else's grandfather couldn't do that. So these historical incidents, they resonate down through generations, and we still live with them today. Now, that's only one example of how public policy and industry practice prevented generations of qualified Americans from buying a home and passing down intergenerational wealth through homeownership. Another example, during the Great Depression, the Federal Housing Administration was created to help rescue distressed homeowners and expand homeownership and invent the modern mortgage. But the FHA's underwriting manual told banks that a neighborhood where Black people and certain immigrants lived was a risky investment. The FHA was relying on advice from the early real estate and appraisal industries. And they determined that the mere presence of people of color in a neighborhood lowered property values. Now, there wasn't any evidence for this claim, but for decades, our industries made decisions based on that theory. And so banks refused to invest in those communities. Cities wouldn't pave the roads or install streetlights or provide trash collection. They zoned those neighborhoods for industrial uses, creating health hazards and driving down property values. So we helped create a self-fulfilling prophecy. The property values did go down, but not because of the people and their deficient character. It was because of public policy and industry practice. From 1934 until 1968, the year of the Fair Housing Act, the FHA helped finance more than $120 billion worth of loans. 98% went to white borrowers. Now, there are many more examples I can cite about government programs boosting homeownership for white people while withholding that same aid from people of color, about urban renewal and highway construction that destroyed Black homes and businesses and wealth. The underlying point is this: people of color in this country have been denied the opportunity to build intergenerational wealth through homeownership. And in many cases, the wealth that they did manage to build was destroyed, which leads us today to a racial homeownership gap of 30 points between Blacks and whites, the same as it was 50 years ago. And statistics show that it's getting bigger. That inability to build equity and pass down intergenerational wealth means that, according to our research, white families are more than twice as likely as Black families to be able to rely on the sale of an existing home for their down payment. Our research shows that Black households are 3 times more likely than white households to have to tap their 401k or pension for their down payment. Our research shows that Black households are more than twice as likely as white households to have student loan debt, and they have more. Today's system of vetting mortgages reflects the weight of this history. That inability to build wealth through homeownership and other factors means that Black Americans are more than 2.5 times as likely as white Americans to get rejected for a mortgage. Making the challenge even more difficult is this historic inventory shortage, which I'm sure your members are grappling with every day. We've put out a lot of research recently highlighting the underbuilding crisis that America is facing right now. We're some 7 million units short of where we need to be. That is driving prices up and out of reach for many people, but particularly for buyers of color. So we have a lot of obstacles to overcome here, but we are committed for the future of this industry, for our economy and our country to right these wrongs.
Obviously, the work that's being done by you and others at NAR is so important. And yet, I'm going to ask the difficult question, right? And do you get any complaints from or pushback from NAR members who, about the resources that are being dedicated to this, or the way that these problems are being addressed?
So we're a 100-plus-year-old organization, and we have a lot of things in our history and our culture that aren't pretty. We're also, to some degree, a cross-section of the American public, so our members are in different places with these issues. I have so many members who've told me about how excited they are that NAR is turning a corner with these new programs and policies. We have a lot of members who are looking to the future of this industry and seeing that if we want to expand homeownership, we need to be more expansive in who we serve. Now, there are some members who hold a more traditional view, but NAR is firmly committed to looking towards the future of real estate and providing our members with top-notch education and resources to keep them focused on the future too.
I think you guys are doing a wonderful job helping these people with traditional views maybe wake up and smell the coffee, maybe start to figure this out finally, hopefully. But I know that there's stuff that you're working on, right? So there's other fair housing initiatives other than what we've talked about. So yeah, maybe you can bring us up to speed. Last year you talked about ACT. And so maybe you could remind us about that and tell us about anything else that our audience should be brought up to speed on.
So at the end of 2019, the release of the Newsday investigation, which made national news and hearings on Capitol Hill, showed us that we needed to do a lot better. And in response, we launched a suite of fair housing resources for members, brokerages, and associations as a part of this ACT Fair Housing Initiative. ACT is an acronym. The A is for accountability, the C is for culture change, and the T is for training. It's a package of industry reforms and tools to shore up our own house. Now, the most important pillar of ACT is accountability. And I'm happy to report that this year we have launched the pilot of our self-testing program for brokerages who want to voluntarily examine themselves for discrimination. This will allow a brokerage to uncover and address problems confidentially before a newspaper or a private fair housing group does. Also, on the accountability front, we've reviewed the real estate licensure laws of all 50 states plus 4 territories for their fair housing education and enforcement provisions. And there is great variability among the states. For example, on education, only about half the states require fair housing training to get a real estate license, and only about a third require it for continuing education. We've shared this information and our recommended best practices with our state associations so that they can consider changing those laws so that we can hold ourselves to the highest standard. Now, the next 2 prongs of ACT, culture change and training, they work in tandem with each other. I've already told you about fair haven and implicit bias training, new approaches to training that can also help change the culture of this industry. Also, we're going to be acknowledging and lifting up realtors who are fair housing leaders, who are working to close the racial homeownership gap in their businesses and communities to ensure that our industry culture is one that applauds and celebrates fair housing. And so at NAR's Fair Housing Month event, that's going to be on our Facebook Live page on April 27th, we are going to be announcing the first ever NAR Fair Housing Champion Award winners. At that event, we're also going to be showcasing some of our latest research on the racial homeownership gap and talk about some solutions. So Jeff, I hope you and your members will tune in on April 27th.
Yeah, we'll definitely get the word out. I know I'll be tuning in. We'll get the word out for sure. We've only got a little bit of time left. So I'm going to throw one other quick question at you, because I know you do policy work for NAR. So want to give us just a quick review on what's going on Capitol Hill, the administration with fair housing, expanding access to homeownership?
So on appraisals, last week, the Biden administration's PAVE task force released its action plan for confronting the stories and studies we've seen indicating that people of color are getting lower appraisals than white people. And this has been a joint project of our Fair Housing Policy Committee, which I staff, and our Real Property Evaluation Committee. And we're seeing a lot of room for improvement there. Increasing consumer input, increasing training requirements, increasing enforcement, fair housing enforcement on appraisers. We think there's a lot we can do there. Now let's talk about the inventory crisis for a minute. Here in Washington, we're proposing a number of creative options to help spur new housing supply, like zeroing out the capital gains tax for those who sell an investment property to a first-time home buyer, tax credits for those who convert commercial space to residential. We know one of the biggest obstacles to new housing construction is local zoning. Zoning has also been used as a tool for discrimination. So here in Washington, we can't change local zoning, but we're asking the federal government to provide tax credits or other support to cities that relax zoning rules, like minimum lot sizes, parking requirements, and multifamily housing bans that limit housing volume. We're also involved in an exciting partnership here in Washington called the Black Homeownership Collaborative. We're proud to have joined NAREB, the Mortgage Bankers Association, Urban League, the National Fair Housing Alliance, and dozens of other industry and advocacy groups as a part of this coalition that's committed to creating 3 million net new Black homeowners by 2030. That's a really ambitious goal and would push the Black homeownership rate up over 50% for the first time. So just to mention a couple of things that we're pushing for, because this is really a comprehensive plan. making changes to the housing finance system to help more qualified buyers get access to mortgage credit, dealing with student loan debt that is burdening so many young people and their parents, disproportionately people of color, from saving up for a down payment. We're advocating for increased funding for down payment assistance, homeownership counseling, fair housing enforcement, education. We have big challenges ahead of us, but we have a powerful coalition of partners, and we think that there's a lot we can do. I just want to quickly quote my friend Elisa Rice, President and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance, who said, "We got to this place because we led with inequity, deliberately and purposely. So now we have to deliberately lead with equity." That's the approach that we embrace.
Great quote. And I have to say too, that you're part of a great team at NAR that I've had the opportunity to become quite familiar with. And I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. Did I forget to ask you about anything? Your one last chance, if there's anything else our audience needs to know about.
This was pretty comprehensive, Jeff. We covered a lot. I hope folks are, still with us. So I'll just leave you with one final message. Most realtors don't think of themselves just as salespeople. They know that they are helping people with the most important purchase of their lives, one that is going to affect generations. They know that they're the stewards of this most valuable asset. We take a pledge to our code of ethics that we will hold ourselves to the highest standard of professionalism and integrity. When you pin that R on your lapel, it means something really important. It means that you're committed to serving all clients equally, to make this American dream of homeownership accessible to every qualified buyer. We at NAR, Jeff and his great staff at your local association, we are here to help you live up to that promise.
Well, that's again, it's, and I know it can be a complicated sometimes subject matter and a difficult subject matter. You do a fantastic job of presenting it. It's always a pleasure to have you on Raising the NSBAR, and you help us raise NSBAR up. And I so appreciate you spending time with us. Thanks again for coming on, Alexia. And I do look forward to seeing you. Well, at worst case, I'll see you in Washington for sure. So
I look forward to it too. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Jeff.
That's a wrap. Please keep an eye on NASBAR Communications to stay current on NASBAR happenings and to know when one of our great podcasts is coming up. Thank you, Bradley Laberman, for the great job running the board. And thanks to you for tuning in to Raising the NSBAR. I very much appreciate it. Talk to you soon.